Pam Bondi walked into this hearing with one strategy: don't answer anything. It took Jasmine Crockett exactly 4 minutes to make that strategy collapse live on camera. But it wasn't the questions that broke her. It was the folder, 43 pages, 38,000 references, and one notation on page 7 that Bondi had no explanation for. What she said next, instead of answering, is why this hearing ended the way it did. It had started like every other oversight hearing, procedural, predictable, almost deliberately boring. Attorney General Pam Bondi entered room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building at 9:03 a.m., flanked by DOJ aides carrying color-coded briefing binders. She looked comfortable, rehearsed, like someone who had done this exact performance 100 times and already knew how it ended. She had no idea what was sitting in the manila folder at Congresswoman Crockett's seat. But stay with this, because what Crockett found in that folder the night before didn't just change the hearing. It changed what accountability in this country looks like. But to understand what happened in that room, you have to go back 24 hours earlier, to a late-night discovery that changed everything. It was 11:42 p.m. when Crockett's senior investigative counsel knocked on her office door. He dropped a printed document on her desk without a word. The document was a compiled breakdown of references to Donald Trump across reviewed Epstein files, 38,000 mentions, his name, his wife's name, Mar-a-Lago. And buried inside those references were investigative notes, FBI field notes, witness statements. Details that had been available to the Department of Justice for months. Details that Pam Bondi's DOJ had apparently decided required no further examination. What Crockett didn't know yet was that the most damaging part wasn't the number. It was what was written inside those files, and she wouldn't discover that until she reached page 7. Crockett didn't sleep that night. At 6:15 a.m., she was already in the hearing room. She sat alone at the long committee table, reading through the file one more time. She wasn't preparing a political attack. She was preparing a case. But then something shifted. Halfway through her third read, she stopped on a single paragraph. She read it again and again, because if what was written there was accurate, if those specific FBI field notes said what she thought they said, then Pam Bondi had not just failed to investigate. She had failed to explain why she hadn't. What none of the Republican members arriving that morning could see, what Bondi's entire communications team had no idea was coming, was that Crockett had already decided the hearing's outcome before a single camera turned on. Here is where it gets worse for Bondi, because she walked in smiling. Bondi arrived 90 minutes later, still radiating the calm confidence of someone protected by institutional armor. She greeted Republican committee members warmly. She shook hands, made small talk, smiled at the press gallery. Her staff arranged talking points on the table in a precise row. She was ready for the questions she expected. She was not ready for Jasmine Crockett. When Crockett's turn finally came, nearly 3 hours into the hearing, the Congresswoman didn't stand up slowly or shuffle papers or clear her throat. She moved with the controlled precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and wasn't going to waste a single second of it. She looked directly at Bondi and said, "I'm not going to ask you questions today." She paused just long enough for the confusion to register on Bondi's face. Because it's become clear that this witness has no intention of actually answering them. The room shifted. Crockett turned to her colleague. "I'm going to ask some basic questions of a different member instead." She looked back at Bondi with an expression that carried no hostility and somehow no warmth either, just the clean, cold focus of someone about to present evidence. "Right or wrong," she said, "raping children." Her colleague answered immediately. "Wrong. Right or wrong, protecting men who rape children." "Wrong." "Thank you," Crockett said, "because I probably never would have gotten those answers from our witness today." She let the implication settle across the room like smoke. Then she opened the folder. What happened next made a 17-year congressional veteran sitting 3 seats away later describe it as the most uncomfortable 4 minutes I've witnessed in this building. And the most important part? It hadn't even started yet. Crockett's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She began reading, not summarizing, not characterizing, but reading directly from the investigative notes compiled across reviewed Epstein files. The number came first. 43 pages of FBI field documentation. more than 38,000 references to the current president of the United States, his wife, or his Palm Beach property. Bondi's pen stopped moving. Crockett continued. She described a specific notation, an account from a federal investigator documenting Ghislaine Maxwell presenting a young girl to Trump. She read the notation about Epstein transporting a victim to Mar-a-Lago. She read Epstein's alleged words verbatim. This is a good one, as he reportedly introduced the girl to the former host of The Apprentice. Bondi's communications director, sitting in the row behind her, leaned forward and whispered something urgent. Bondi gave the smallest possible shake of her head. Her hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, were now flat against the surface, pressing down hard. And then Crockett reached page 7. "I am not saying the president is a pedophile," she said, her voice carrying the deliberate clarity of someone choosing words with surgical precision. "What I am saying is that there is a significant amount of documented evidence in files controlled by your department, suggesting he maintained close relationships with men who are, and your department has done nothing with that evidence." That was the moment every reporter in the room realized. Bondi had no answer for this. But what Bondi did next, instead of addressing a single page of those files, is what made this hearing impossible to forget. Bondi finally spoke. She pivoted immediately, not to the files, not to the specific references, not to the investigative notes Crockett had just read into the Congressional record. She pivoted to undocumented immigrants. She began listing names, crimes committed in different states, convictions from Texas, from Georgia, from places entirely unrelated to anything in the folder in front of Crockett. And that pivot, more than anything else said in that room, is what shattered the composure Crockett had maintained for the last 4 minutes. "You're spending more taxpayer resources arresting journalists," Crockett said, her voice finally carrying an edge that cut through the practiced calm, "than you are prosecuting pedophiles and creeps." She leaned slightly forward. "Your boss, the president, stated that this administration, and I'm quoting, took the freedom of speech away. And at your direction, the DOJ arrested Don Lemon and Georgia Fort." Bondi's jaw tightened visibly. A muscle moved near her temple. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "A judge rejected you," Crockett continued. "A grand jury rejected you in the Kelly case. Another grand jury rejected you in the Slacken case. The Tish James case was dismissed. The Comey case was dismissed." She paused for exactly 1 second. "This is exactly why people think you're incompetent," Crockett said, her voice finally snapping. "Because you sit there and refuse to answer the simplest questions." The silence that followed lasted 8 full seconds. Reporters who had been typing stopped. Every camera in the room held on Bondi's face, on the slight flush along her jawline, on the way she blinked twice in rapid succession, on the almost imperceptible moment when her practiced composure cracked and something raw flickered beneath it. Her aide passed her a note. She didn't look at it. She didn't address a single specific claim. Not the 38,000 references, not the investigative notes, not the named individuals, not the dismissed cases. Instead, she looked at the Republican member beside her and said, with a tone that was supposed to carry authority, and instead sounded like someone reaching for a life preserver, "You want to talk about what she wouldn't address? Hakeem Jeffries took money from Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein was convicted." Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch. I didn't look away. This is the part that no one in that room will forget. Not the documents, not the numbers. What comes next? That was Bondi's collapse. Not a dramatic breakdown. Something worse. A complete inability to respond to documented evidence with anything except a change of subject. The Attorney General of the United States, faced with 38,000 file references and specific FBI investigative notes, had chosen to talk about a different politician's donor history. And that moment, that specific non-answer, is now in the permanent Congressional record. Nothing removes it. "Let me address the survivors," Crockett said, turning slightly toward the gallery where Epstein victims and their advocates had been sitting in silence through hours of testimony. "Because that is exactly what they are. They are not victims. They are survivors." Her voice, for the first time, carried something other than precision, something that sounded like genuine fury compressed into controlled syllables. Let me say thank you for having more courage and moral clarity in your pinky fingers than the entire Department of Justice has shown in this hearing room today. Crockett gathered her folder. She looked at Bondi one final time. You will be remembered, she said quietly, as one of the worst attorneys general in the history of this country. An attorney general who prioritized obstruction over justice, corruption over law, and loyalty to one man over loyalty to the Constitution. She yielded back her time. The room stayed silent for 3 full seconds after her microphone went dead. Within the hour, 38,000 references was trending. Within 2 hours, 3 former federal prosecutors called for an independent investigation. By evening, 2 senators demanded Bondi explain on the record why Crockett's notations had produced 0 investigative action. The word resignation appeared in 17 news segments before midnight. Bondi's office released one statement. It said the Attorney General remained committed to the rule of law. It did not mention the files. It did not mention a single dismissed case, because Crockett hadn't come to that room to win an argument. She came to read the files out loud, and once those words were in the Congressional record, spoken into live microphones in front of every major outlet, nothing could put them back in the folder. Silence, when it is documented, becomes its own kind of evidence. Institutions that choose deflection over accountability don't get to decide when the questions stop. If what you watched today made you feel something, if those survivors in that gallery stayed with you for even a second, then you understand why this cannot disappear into the news cycle. The files are in the record, and so is everything Pam Bondi refused to answer.